award, excellence, recognize contributions, and celebrate and extend good wishes to each other, and head home safely, inshallah, after 3 very intensive, stimulating, and extensive deliberations in the context of this 25th anniversary conference of the ERF. We'll start first by showcasing the books of the ERF and also the policy portal of the ERF, and then we close with providing awards to the best papers in some of the sessions or the themes that the reviewers have decided to award best papers in their sessions. So I will start first. We have 4 books, and I will start first with Professor Raji Asad because he had to leave early. And the book is Jordanian Labor Market Between Fragility and Resilience.
Thank you, Ibrahim. So this book should have been presented last because it is the last to be accepted for publication, but I have to rush to the airport, so the chair very kindly made the exception. So this is a book that emanated from the Jordan Labor Market Panel Survey of 2016. It is edited by Carolyn Kraft and myself, and is going to be published by OUP, hopefully by fall 2019. The full manuscript was already copy edited and is ready to go. It's part of a series. It's the 4th of a series that is published by OUP on labor markets in the region. The first Jordan book was based on the 2010 data. It was published in 2014. And then we have the Egyptian labor market in an era of revolution, which was published in 2015 based on 2012 data. The Tunisian labor market book will be presented by Munji in a minute. And this one, which is the Jordanian labor market between fragility and resilience, is the 4th in that series. There were 2 previous volumes that were published by American University Press, which were prior to that. As we know, Jordan was buffeted by a series of very severe external shocks between 2010 and 2016 that dramatically affected both the economy and society there. There was a sharp deceleration of growth. It was growing very fast in the first half of in the 2000s. And then after 2010, that growth decelerated very sharply to about less than 2% per year. There was also a very rapid increase in the size of the youth population, which was also acquiring education at very high rates. There was a continued inflow of large numbers of migrants, but especially large number of refugees from the Syrian crisis. And Jordan also is characterized by one of the lowest labor force participation rates, not only for women, which is a common feature in the region, but also for men. And the participation rates for men of all ages, young as well as old, and very early retirement age as well. So the book tries to look at labor markets in Jordan within that context. It has 3 major parts. One is looking generally at the evolution of the Jordanian labor market, looking at issues of labor supply, employment, participation, unemployment, and wages, and how they've evolved over time between 2010 and 2016 in particular. Part 2 focuses specifically on migrants and refugees. And in this particular round of the survey, we attempted to try and capture the refugee phenomenon by having an oversample of neighborhoods in Jordan that have high concentrations of non-Jordanians. So we got a very substantial sample of refugees that we could do special analysis on. And then part 3 is about transitions in the life cycle, looking at education, school-to-work transition, marriage and fertility, and retirement and social insurance and social security. And so the chapters really flow very nicely to look at these various phenomena. Now, let me just go quickly through the main messages. We've known that Jordan has always been kind of this island of stability in a very turbulent region, and it has been basically the recipient of multiple waves of refugees from a number of conflicts starting all the way back in 1948. And there is a sense that these refugees flows must really affect Jordan very seriously, but in fact, we find that while there were serious shocks that affected Jordan, the refugee influx per se in itself does not seem to have major impacts on the Jordanian labor market. And the only area where we found major impacts is in the housing market, or some impact, it's not even major impact, in the housing market for low-income Jordanian. But as far as education and as far as labor market outcomes, we found the refugees had actually quite minor impact, if any. But the large drops in employment rates and increase in unemployment have really their origins in the evolution of the economic growth and labor demand in the economy as a whole as a result of other shocks. Despite these low participation rate and even decreasing participation, we find that wages in Jordan were quite stable. And in fact, inequality in wages declined over the period 2010 to 2016. Now, part of the explanation possibly for the fact that the Jordanians themselves were protected from these labor supply shocks from refugees is that they already had a lot of migrant workers in Jordan, and these migrant workers appear to have absorbed most of the increase in labor supply as a result of refugees, and the migrant workers primarily from Egypt. In fact, they seem to have, many of them seem to have gone back to Egypt. But their numbers have increased over the period, the period that we're looking at. Now, some of the major concerns looking ahead is the continued very low participation in the labor force by both males and females. Among women, the participation rate was stable, but the unemployment rate went way up, which means that those who participate are more likely to be unemployed than employed. And there seems to be still a very protracted transition from school to work, with a lot of young people taking a very long time, especially young men, to obtain the first employment. And this phenomenon, which we refer to as NEET, not in education, employment, or training, seems to be really growing in the case of Jordan. And so clearly there are opportunities for Jordan to grow in the areas, in industries that absorb some of this educated labor in good jobs, but those have not yet materialized. And high-level services appear to be one such opportunity, especially if they're done for export. And there are still plenty of opportunities to explore the panel data from the 2010 to 2016 JLMPS, and I encourage people, the data is publicly available through ERF data portal, and all the chapters from the book, don't tell OUP that, but all the chapters are available as working papers on the ERF website as well. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Raji, and have a safe trip. The next is Professor Jeffrey Nugent, and the title of the book, Institutions and Macroeconomic Policies in Resource-Rich Arab Economies.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ibrahim, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm going to go through briefly, just show you a bunch of slides that I hope will give you at least an insight into what's done in different chapters. So it's a book with, I guess, 12 chapters, and each one is a little bit different, but on the overall issue of institutions and macroeconomic policies in resource-rich Arab countries, what we call RRAES. So this is the second volume on this general topic. We followed the first one of Ibrahim and Hoda Salim that came out 2 years ago, Understanding and Avoiding the Oil Curse in Resource-Rich Arab Countries. So this is the second one. Other co-editors are Kamiar Mohadis and Hoda Salim. There's a list of the chapters and the authors first, and then the chapters, and you see quite a few different topics if you have a moment to see those, the second column there. But I'm just going to quickly touch, since I have only a few minutes, let me just quickly go through each chapter a little bit, so then you can decide when you get the book, if you will, what you might want to divert your attention to or concentrate on first. The general aim of chapter 1 is an introduction to about what we're mentioning. It's a follow-up on Ibrahim's earlier book, that these RRAEs need to face the challenges of what would seem to be prolonged period of relatively oil prices, but also periodic volatility in those prices. And this is, and then to detect the contribution of various factors to the problems that have arisen. Put emphasis on excessive volatility in spending and other things that really hurt the management, and serve as the challenge to management. The challenges are multidimensional, and one of the long-lasting ones is how to get economic diversification instead of being oil dependence. Because of these countries are mostly on fixed exchange rates, there's really not that much room for a monetary policy, so the emphasis is on fiscal policy and fiscal management in general. So there are 4 questions that we think are addressed in various parts of the book, and in many cases in several different chapters. The second chapter by Adil Malik, who's going to be talking about another book, chapter 2 is on political economy. So this large part of the way we see it is about institutions being so important in the process of how well oil revenues are managed, that calls attention to the need for political economy. So fiscal policies he views as being serving the elites, the leadership elites, at making it easier for them to stay in power by being able to manage, having a large share of the say over what happens in fiscal management, on what gets spent and how it's done and so on. And the political economy perspective explains why fiscal spending is so volatile, that it really goes up when oil prices go up. These key elites need to be rewarded very quickly. The next chapter, this collective chapter with Kamiar and one of our previous co-editors, Amani El-Anshasi, and myself, on oil volatility and institutions. Just be very brief, because this is a theme that comes up in all the chapters, that in this chapter we think we demonstrate quite clearly that it's not just high oil revenues or anything else really. It's not just having a lot of oil. It's not that really matters, but it's the volatility of revenues and not being able to handle them well when you have weak institutions. And that's a theme that comes up overall. But we do present some, I hope, quite solid empirical evidence to really demonstrate that point, that it's not something else. It's this volatility in oil revenues combined with weak, poor governance and use of handling them. The next chapter by Ibrahim and his colleagues is bringing in, extending a little bit beyond the fiscal policy. It's the main emphasis on the fiscal monetary interdependence and to exchange rates, and provides some very interesting evidence in support of the fact that natural resources can help implement counter-cyclical fiscal policy, can do that, but only when you have good quality institutions to back it up. So it's not a curse of death. Oil is not the curse, but if you have the right, better institutions, you can do better. And they cite the very big difference between GCC countries and the sort of countries like Sudan and Yemen that have not been able to manage their exchange rate system as well as those like the GCC. Hoda Salim does central bank independence matter, so she develops very specific measures, updates these measures of central bank independence in the region, and argues that weak institutions and central bank independence, that with weak institutions, central bank independence has not always mattered, really, for macroeconomic outcomes, and argues that GCC central banks, considered less independent central banks, that they've managed better than others in this respect. So so it's not central bank independence matters, but with various conditions. That if you have if you have better institutions, then it's going to work better or differently than in other cases. Then Jeff FRANKEL, who's been here, I know, on previous occasions that you all know, he comes up with a very interesting policy proposition for achieving counter-cyclical policy in the region with in these oil, especially the oil countries, tying the fixed exchange rates that do exist in the GCC countries, but to a broader basket, not just the dollar, but also the euro and the oil price. So he calls this the currency plus commodity basket, or CCB. And then he performs a counterfactual analysis that shows that these countries would have been considerably more stable under the proposed CCB than under the fixed exchange rate regimes that they actually practiced. And then he goes into a long discussion about how you can introduce this kind of thing. And then Bassem Kamar and Raimundo Soto have a chapter on exchange rate regimes and economic performance. I'm not going to have time to go through all. This is a very rich chapter, but it shows that oil resource abundance leads to higher growth, while oil dependence captured by a high level of export concentration, being an oil export, reduces growth relative to more diversified countries. So it puts a heavy emphasis on diversification. And then chapter 8 with Shanta Devarajan as a chapter on how to use oil revenues efficiently. And he gave, I think a couple of years ago at the ERF conference, he gave an analysis of that at that time in a previous thing. But this is now really nicely written up in a beautiful chapter where he argues that the problem is the tendency of the natural resource, the AERs, to overspend inefficiently, and attributes this to the fact that the revenues go to the government directly without going through citizens. So the proposal is that you're going to have a lot better system and more accountability if the oil revenues go to the citizens, and then they're taxed and so on. And by taxing, people want to know what's going on, and they're going to pay more attention to making sure there's more greater efficiency in spending. Then we have a chapter, Kamiyar, myself, and Hoda, the three editors, on reforming fiscal institutions in Arab economies. It really has three parts. As I mentioned at the beginning, it has an historical overview of the evolution of oil in the countries, the oil countries of the region. And one thing that's particularly interesting about that was to argue, instead of the fact that, well, once you have oil, then you've got these autocracies and you've got, there's not really citizen involvement. But what we found in our historical analysis was that the same situation was there before oil in these countries. You had the merchants and you had the local royalty that would simply collect the customs on trade customs and tariffs and stuff. Then we do a brief review of policy shortcomings. This is a review, largely a review of literature. A lot of people in this room have done wonderful studies on the shortcomings, the policy, and then we go on to what I think is hopefully a quite comprehensive list of countries. I mentioned a few things there, policies that countries could use to mitigate this problem. And then the last three chapters are chapters on specific countries. So this one, chapter 10 by KABBASHI SULIMAN, who's here in the audience, provides a nice chapter that's rather distinctive, and it has a kind of political economy perspective, kind of historically, looking at how political institutions affect fiscal policy outcomes and mechanisms and the efficiency of these, where he goes back through history of various political institutions that have been developed in Sudan's history from colonial times to the present, and shows how in each phase there would be a very distorted sort of pattern of the revenues being used to, one, keep the regime together and keep the country somewhat together, but then these different regimes sort of collide with each other, so it's difficult at the long run to keep it all together. So the institutional frictions induced by these strategies have led to important social, political, and even military conflicts. Then the next to last chapter is Hoda El Babi, right? El Babi, right? El Babi. I somehow left her name off there. So and Mbedi, yeah, sorry, with Hoda Salim on fiscal outcomes in Bahrain. So this is one where they look at again putting the blame on the institutions, and arguing it's the institutions, it's not anything else, it's really the institutions. And this is an interesting context, because one where there's a little bit more democratic involvement with parliament and this kind of thing. So you have developed institutions, you have a fairly formal budgeting system, but the budget process has been undermined by the structure of, again, a bicameral parliament. Absence of restrictions on Parliament's ability to amend the budget weakens the position of the executive, and therefore there gets to be a lot of overspending, even though there is somewhat, some of the process, the budgetary process is rather open, but at the end you can't tell what has the government really done in terms of its influence over the overall thing. Okay, then the last chapter is one by Raimundo Soto here on fiscal institutions in the UAE. Though this is UAE, of course, is a very special case where the oil wealth belongs to the individual emirates, not to the UAE itself. And that puts a different, the UAE budget, therefore, is rather small. The individual emirate budgets are rather large. So it's a rather different setting. And so the revenues are really mostly decided at the emirate level, but then there's a political economy issue about this is a very special situation, and so they develop a really nice political economy model indicating how agreements get to be. But it's a variant on the well-known authoritarian bargain model, but I think one that deserves a lot of attention. Okay, finally, just thanks and acknowledgments to the Economic Research Forum And so first, several aspects of it to our eminent colleagues involved in the previous volume that sort of set the path of what such a book might look like. Mentioned most of the names, or at least some of the names. There are many more that should be mentioned there. And then the ERF managers and conference organizers that allowed us to have sort of sessions on the volume and the chapters before, so to get feedback on them, and referees that were secured by the ERF. So, and this goes all the way down to people on the staff like Hoda Azmi and Namis Nabil and Yasmin Fahim that have been very helpful in setting that up. The funding from the ERF to hire some wonderful people to write some of these chapters for the volume, coming from Riyadh, the Research Initiative for the Arab Development through the World Bank and from the Arab Fund, and then the research assistance, editorial assistance of Jala Yusuf, Shireen Ghonaim, and others from the ERF. And then also we found that working with Oxford University Press was really very efficient and really good. They've done a great job. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jeff. The following speaker is Professor Adil Malik, Crony Capitalism in the Middle East. Sorry about that. Sorry. It's okay. Oh, I forgot. I'm sorry.
Okay, delighted to be here and presenting the findings of this collaborative project between Ishaq Divan, myself, and Isaac Atias. And the genesis of the project was really the Arab Spring, which at that time raised a general understanding that the Arab Spring, in a sense, was a rebuke to crony capitalism too, because behind every regime that was being contested lied some businessmen who became the object of public ridicule. You had Mubarak, then you have the Ahmed Az, the Ben Ali and the Leila Trabelsi. Assad's regime, you had the Rami Makhloufs. Today you have Bouteflika, his brother Said. In Morocco, the monarchy, you had the Maksan. So this concentration of economic and political power has remained a focus of intellectual attention for quite some time. And one of the best books in this regard was Stephen Haidman's Networks of Privilege. While that book provided a very generalized caricature of business-state relationship, we didn't know who these cronies are, which sectors they operate, and the precision that we need in social science to think about its impact on outcomes. So that's really the scope of this project, and the idea really was to gather a set of scholars and data sets from different countries where we could lay our hands on data and identify who the cronies are, who are politically connected businesses, what is their nature of exposure to different sectors of the economy, what kind of mechanisms they use to privilege themselves, and what are the possible impacts on job creation, firm productivity, larger outcomes that we care about. I think the key takeaway for the project is that this book, which has about 14 chapters on different countries and indeed some analytical chapters, such as the chapter by Stefan Hertog that talks about business-state relationship more broadly in the MENA region, they offer us two key inputs. One, greater specificity, because each chapter compiles qualitative information about where these cronies are, who these cronies are, and kind of combines those data sets, those qualitative data sets, with quantitative data on firms, on sectors, on industry and tech censuses, and combining these two sources of information allows us to provide very rich perspectives on the impact of cronyism and indeed the exposure of cronyism in various sectors of the economy. Most of these papers rely on a very eclectic range of methods. Some are very qualitative, others use particular shocks to identify the effect of cronyism, yet others use methods in sociology, and so on and so forth. So quite an eclectic mix of methods. Overall, the sense we get is that across the MENA region and the countries covered, Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey, Iran, in most of these contexts we found that the presence of cronies is large, it's substantial, and in certain cases we were able to show that this presence is growing. There's also differentiation along size and sectoral presence, that they're organized around pyramidal structures. Many of these crony firms are generally large in size, and apart from Turkey, they are not very much exposed in the export-oriented sectors. So here is the proportion of these ISIC 4 subsectors that are characterized as crony across 3 countries, 3 selected countries, Tunisia, Egypt, and Morocco. And you would see that there's quite a bit of variation. The wood sector, for example, has 80% exposure to cronies in Tunisia, while only 40% in Egypt and 20% in Morocco. And this sort of variation is useful for us because we can then use that variation to ask larger questions about firm performance, profitability, their impact on growth. We also have information about the evolution of crony presence over time. So here is a striking plot from Morocco, which shows how non-tradable sectors were significantly more exposed to cronyism, the solid blue line, compared to the tradable sectors. And that's clear because a lot of the cronies prefer to operate in real estate and finance and a lot of other services sector. The book also offers, for the first time, very refined understanding on mechanisms, possible mechanisms of privilege, the use of subsidies, the financial sector, use of privatization sales, regulatory capture, trade policy, land allocation. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but will provide you very brief charts around those. So here's a chart from Ishaq Divan's work, and it's quite popular. People know about this work, which talks about how PCFs, the politically connected firms, are disproportionately present in sectors that make an intensive use of energy subsidies. Here is a chart from Mohammed Obinal's work on Morocco, where he looked at overlapping board memberships. So he looked at board interlocks in Morocco and finds that finance actually sits at the heart of these interlocking board membership, through which the monarchy exerts influence over the economy through its presence and intermediaries in the financial sector. Laila Baghdadi and Bob Rajka's paper on Tunisia tells us about the way in which the profitability of Ben Ali firms in Tunisia was largely attributable to those privatized firms that were subjected to regulatory capture. So if there were certain regulatory authorization requirements in that sector, only then the privatized firms were profitable after privatization. We also have evidence from Iran, which gives us a slightly different take, where the privatization resulted not in the state-owned enterprises passing on to families, but they actually passed on to organizations. And you see a greater diversification of ownership types rather than the concentration of firms under a single owner. And Kevan Harris actually provides an excellent narrative around Iran's specific political economy, how this was shaped by the experience of war, sanctions, and the need to cater to diverse social constituencies. There's also work on trade policy by myself and Ferdinand Eibel that talks about how the EU trade agreements, both in Morocco and in Egypt, were captured by insiders. There was a hope that these trade agreements would lead to trade liberalization, but instead they were highly partial in nature, in the sense that tariff liberalization was compensated by a wave of increase in non-tariff measures. And as the solid lines show us, this increase in non-tariff barriers measures was far more in sectors that were prior to the period were connected to political actors. In the case of Morocco, we find that it happens largely in firms that are connected not to monarchy, but actually to politicians, former cabinet ministers, which provides you interesting input into how the rents from cronyism are used to sustain ruling coalitions. So for the monarchy itself is the real estate non-tradable sector. For the other members of the ruling coalition, mainly the cabinet ministers, is the trade policy which is used as the prime instrument for rent distribution. In Turkey, we have evidence of procurement contracts and how the AKP firms received privileged treatment in these procurement contracts. And the study actually studied 18,000 procurement contracts to make those claims, and there's a very sophisticated analysis behind that paper. Sorry, this title is wrong, it should be regulation. Again, from Tunisia, you find that the profitability of connected firms is largely attributable to their presence in regulated sectors. Now, what does this mean for broader outcomes of job creation, productivity, and growth? The clearest evidence comes from Egypt, where the connected firms derived 60% of the net corporate profits, but generated only 11% of employment. You have similar evidence from Tunisia and Lebanon. And the big picture that we build as part of this is that in MENA region, there is a real irony of development whereby privileges are concentrated amongst the large connected firms, and employment is concentrated amongst the mass of informal sector firms. But there is variation, right? The project is about giving us more specificity, but also heterogeneity. So we find that actually in Morocco and Turkey, cronyism during this period was indeed consistent with growth. And in fact, Isaac Atiyah's work on Turkey shows us that since the 2000s, there's actually been a productivity catch-up between Anatolian tigers who were operating in the AKP heartland. They were largely small and medium-sized enterprises. They were more inserted into export sectors and the supply chains. And they enjoyed a productivity catch-up with firms that were located in the traditional industrial clusters in Ankara and Izmir and Istanbul. Now, what does this mean for the global literature? What this book tries to do, because it's the first book globally that uses this kind of empirically oriented approach, combining qualitative and quantitative data sets to think about cronyism. So the introduction actually tries to develop a broader narrative on how to place MENA cronyism on a global scale, because there's cronyism everywhere. Is there something specific about the Middle East and North Africa that differentiates it from other regions? And we come up with 5 different factors, and these are clearly hypotheses, invitation for researchers to do more work on this. The first is that the MENA stands out for the range of its exclusion. Is the sheer scale of exclusion in MENA is remarkable, because regimes are extremely risk averse in seeing independent sources of economic power. There are high barriers of entry in rent-thick sectors, and many of these barriers are not just economic but political barriers. And what I say in the introduction is that this is a logic about partner or perish, because for many of the firms these are really blunt instruments. You know, you either sell the firm or go into partnership with the regime. The logic that is famously known in Syria is you're either with the Makhluf or against the regime. And that logic means that a lot of firms go under the radar screen rather than being noticed. And that clearly is a very specific factor we think about the MENA region. The third differentiating aspect is the differential bargaining strength. While in the rest of the world, cronyism is often an equilibrium outcome of the lobbying power of the firms and the need for the politicians to finance themselves. In the MENA region, the regimes hold a decisive upper hand in their relationship with the private sector. Cronies are often created through the initiative of the political authority, and they're either weak or non-existing bargaining structures. So if you were to think about Zengole's idea of a Goldilocks equilibrium, where there's an economic balance of economic and political power, there's an equilibrium where economic power is granted by political power, like in Suharto's Indonesia, or vertically integrated political regimes where rich businessmen control the government. The MENA region falls closer to the first category. The fourth differentiating aspect is that the region's adverse historical legacy, very weak base of the merchant class, persistence reliance on external rent. So there's very little need to engage with cronies and with the business sector, with the productive classes. And there's limited pressure from populations. Not only does the region lack a private sector, it lacks a constituency for a strong private sector, which means the populations prefer to see money on the table, as Ishaq would say, rather than demand support for unconnected firms. And therefore, cronyism is usually de-linked from any economic rationale like an industrial policy or so. We also feel that during the era of liberalization, the period on which the book focuses, you see an erosion of state capacity. While the state is deregulating, it's also re-regulating, in the sense that it is replacing one type of measure with another, and the enforcement capacity of the state is falling, which again contributes to this stuff. Another very distinguishing factor, particularly made evident by Ishaq Atiyah's work on Turkey, is that unlike East Asia or Turkey, crony firms have limited presence across much of the MENA region in export sectors. So here you see these plot for the religious network firms, the AKP-affiliated firms, the secular network firms, and others. And you see there's substantial export presence of all three types of firms, but particularly of these connected firms. So the fact that many of these MENA cronies were not present in the connected sectors is another part of the problem. So there are a couple of other mechanisms we offer on why the MENA region, cronyism in the MENA region, is fairly different. We end with a set of questions that the next stage of research should take us towards. What's the nature of exchange or bargain between politicians and firms? What is happening to non-crony firms is probably very important for thinking about this question as a whole. Is there any competition amongst crony firms? What is the impact on and the relationship with the informal sector? All these questions we raise as part of this project, but we hope that this project will not just be furnishing useful insights from the MENA region, but it will in fact be setting the global benchmark for thinking about crony capitalism.
Many thanks, Adil. Last on the book section, but certainly not least, Professor Munjib Ghazala on the Tunisian labor market in an era of transition.
Okay, thank you, Ibrahim. Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure and privilege for me to present this book edited by Ragi and myself about the Tunisian labor market. This book is not just ours, of course. It's 19 people have contributed to this book. So hope I will do a good job presenting, but I'm sure I will not be able to do justice to all of them. How does it work? Where should I push? Okay. So because I was supposed to speak just for 10 minutes, my presentation will only give a brief overview, and I will not be able to go deep in all of the chapters, 10 chapters that cover a lot of things, because the aim of the book is to offer a comprehensive and deep examination of all the major labor market issues. That means the size, the structure of the labor force, employment, unemployment, labor market functioning, segmentation, gender differences, child labor, education, and migration. All of these topics are covered in the book. Most of the analysis is based on the TLMPS, the Tunisian Labor Market Panel Survey, but also on other data sources. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank ERF, which funded all the book and managed all the process of production of this book from its inception to its final production. Some people may think that the book doesn't have a storyline because it talks about everything. It's true that different people may read it and use it in different ways and according to different perspectives. But there is a major storyline which is about this, that in Tunisia, this is very well known, unemployment is high, and it's highest among youth, and especially among the educated. The more educated, the more likely to be unemployed. And even more so for women. Unemployment in Tunisia is primarily women unemployment, educated women unemployment. So the book tries to explore the key factors and mechanisms that underlie this type of level of unemployment. Of course, the factors can be linked either to supply and demand and also to mechanisms. We have still have a problem with supply pressure and also of slow evolution and level of labor demand. But also we can talk about the mechanism and dynamics and regulations that govern the labor market. All of these have contributed to the current situation, to this level of unemployment of youth and women unemployment. Labor supply, it is the main topic of chapter 1, but it's covered almost by most of the other chapters. While labor demand is mainly covered by chapter 2. As you say, labor demand is not well treated, and I'll come back to this. The mechanisms and incentives and institutions that govern the labor market are dealt with in chapter 3 and 4. And one of the main ideas that come out is about the mechanism that determine the level and the size of the informal sector, because it tries to explain why and how the mechanism lead to high cost of formality and low cost of informality. And the low cost of informality is not due simply to the fact that you avoid all the costs and the impediments due to the linked to the formal sector, but also due to the fact that to the low level of law enforcement, because the institutions are weak and the government does not reinforce strictly enough the laws. Nobody cares about the cost of formality. It's not costly to stay informal. It's more costly to be formal. So the enforcement mechanism is very important, not just the legal requirement and the bureaucracy that is linked to the formal sector. So through these two chapters, we try to explain why the economy is not producing and generating enough good jobs, and how the weak law enforcement is one of the factors that underlies the unemployment situation. Now, coming back to supply, the supply pressure. We may say that in Tunisia, we have gone a long way in terms of the demographic transition. We are at a very advanced stage, yet there is still a supply pressure, not only in terms of composition of the labor force, but also in terms of quantity. It's true that in Tunisia, the fertility rate has gone down very sharply between 1970 approximately and 2000. from about 6 children per woman to less than 2. And consequently, the growth rate, the population growth rate, went down very much. It went down to less than 1% around 2000, or even a little before. But if you look at the graph, you see that it did go down, but it also went up. It started going up a little bit. Not that much, but significantly enough. And that's for 2 main reasons. It's because that fertility did go up again. It went up to above 2 for many years. And it's even, it has now stabilized, but that has a very clear impact. Some people think it's because of another, because it started to increase quite much after 2010. But it's not proved. Actually, it is now stabilized around 2.1. So, but that has an impact. There is also an echo. If you look at the pyramids of 2000, compare the pyramids of 2004 and 2014, you see two wings showing that, again, the population is growing. And that's because of an echo, and also because of this fertility factor. I mean, Tunisia went through a youth bulge before mainly before 1995. I mean, and so the kids born in the 80s and the 90s have reached the age of marriage, and then they're making more children, and we find that echo. So, but those are 2 factors: the echo and the increase in fertility that is creating a little more pressure on the supply level. But if you add to this the fact that we have about 600,000 unemployed, even if we manage to reduce that number by 50 or 60,000, which we are not doing, a year, that means it will take at least 10 more years of supply pressure. So quantitatively, in spite of the advanced demographic transition, the labor supply is creating a lot of pressure in the labor market. But the main pressure comes from the shift in the composition of the labor supply, of the labor force. And it's mainly in terms of education. We all know, it's well known that the Tunisian labor force is becoming a lot more educated. It has been increasingly educated, at least in terms of degrees, because there's a problem with skills. But in terms of the number of kids going to, people who have gone to universities and high schools, there is clearly a very important shift. The number of the enrollment in universities tripled in about 15 years, between 1995 and 2010. The same thing with the number of graduates, and the share of those who have tertiary education has been growing a lot. And it's very important also to know that the part of women has increased very much. Actually, Tunisia has gone completely through the reversal of the educational gap, the gender gap. Now, more women are educated than men. At the universities, about 2/3 of the students are women, and about 2/3 of the women, those who graduate are women, and the most brilliant are the women. And this is extremely important. So the rapid expansion of education in Tunisia has led to a complete reversal of the gender gap, and yet, even because the participation rate, the women participation rate in the labor force remains low. It has increased, but not enough. It's still around 26, 27%, which is still very low. Of course, this is an extremely important concern, and it's, but it's also going to be at the heart of the future evolution of the labor force. Given the structure and the number of educated women, things cannot remain the way they are. Sooner or later, I think women are going to be more active. And it's a good news, but also in terms of labor supply pressure. That means that we are going to have an increase of the labor force because of the higher participation of women. So we've got actually at least 2 chapters devoted to women in the labor market, especially dealing with their participation rate, their employment rate, the determinants of their participation, of their employment, and these are written mainly, but not only by women. I'm not mentioning the names because it's just, it will take time, and I apologize for my co-authors, especially those who are not here. Even we've got 2 of them who are, we have Ahmed Limam and Samir Ghazwani who are around, but they deserve it because they're here. But I'm sorry I'm not mentioning all the names. But the chapters written on women, chapter 5 and 6, are extremely important, and they do analyze in detail both the participation and the employment of women by category, by level of education, and especially by region, because in Tunisia we have also disparities, regional disparities. Women in the lagging regions have more problem accessing the labor market. And women, especially in the lagging regions, have mobility problems. And that's extremely important. And I think somehow, when women will be more empowered, they will be able to do something to solve, to break the barriers and to make the women mobility easier. I don't think it's extremely, this is the cultural factor, but I don't think it's very much rooted. The problem has to do with safety for women who are in the labor market. So if women can make sure that they can work with safety and make sure that they have the safety for their children, I think they will be coming very soon. And women, when they are empowered, I think they will do something about this. We have also a chapter which is devoted to women participation, but also on the role of education, marriage, and fertility. Chapter 7 on the Tunisian women shows how women have made substantial progress in recent years in gaining greater control over several aspects of their lives, including marriage and fertility. This is also a chapter written by on women, but from a different perspective. Finally, we have also a chapter on education, and this is a very important chapter because it shows, even though we have made a lot of progress, the rate of return on education remains very low compared to other countries. And this low level It has to do with the quality of education, to the incomplete, efficient, and inefficient labor market information system, to the incentives and governance problems. Those who are in charge of the education system do not have the incentives to make sure that they produce the right skills and to respond to the needs of the economy. And there are many important disparities between private and public, and between the regional, from region to another, and the gap between the informal and formal sector is also a factor that explains the level of the education system and the low level of return. Child labor is another chapter. In Tunisia, even though child labor is not pervasive, this chapter shows that working children are disadvantaged regarding school attendance, grade repetition, and number of dropouts. It's more frequent in rural areas, as we know, but it also does exist everywhere. It's not only a rural phenomenon. Migration is the topic of the 10th chapter, and it's also a very important chapter, but since time goes fast, I have to just mention something about the labor demand, which is covered in the 2nd chapter, and which is the very important side of the labor market, but it's not well covered mainly because of the data availability, and especially about the labor skills and demand, and labor demand, about the labor and skill demand and forecast. We have very little information about the needs of the economy. Everybody wants to make sure that the education system operates according to the needs, but we don't know much about the needs. Very little information is provided with this regard. We know, anyhow, that for the moment, that the better jobs are mostly provided by the larger firms, and most of the economy is comprised. Okay, just a sec. Most of the firms are very small, and they do not grow well, very fast enough. So the size of the firm is an important factor. There are institutional problems. There are also the positioning of the Tunisian economy internationally favors a little bit the generation of good jobs, but not enough. So the final word is that Tunisia still needs the economic transition. We have gone to a large extent through the political transition, but the economic transition, the reforms needed to improve the quality of the jobs, has not started yet. Sorry about this. Thank you for being along, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Munji, and my apology for having to rush you because, you know. Okay, now I'd like to ask Dr. Shireen Ghanoim, the Director of Policy Outreach and Communication at the ERF, to give us a preview of the forum.
Good afternoon, everybody. It seems that working with ERF is always a joy and a challenge. So my latest challenge now is to give you 3 messages in 3 minutes. So I'll do my best to be very telegraphic. The key message is that I'm particularly glad that we're all on the same page. We're asking the same questions. How can we build on our high quality and independent research to make a real difference in the policy-making process? How can we focus together on a broader, wider impact? And how can ERF help? So my first message to you is really how can we work together towards that? My second message is that I'm particularly pleased that we've started working on implementing the ERF communications research uptake, and policy outreach strategy. And since I'm very short for time, what I'd like to do is to share with you the principles guiding the strategy and how far we've gone in doing that. For the policy outreach, we're particularly keen to approach policy in different ways. So what we've been doing is that we've been facilitating platforms to actually convene researchers and policymakers, to actually provide a channel for different publications, be it the policy publications, policy briefs or perspectives, and also through the portal. And in the spirit of making it short, I can give one example that you can actually go online and check it out yourself, is actually the, there. It was actually the ERF Policy Conference on Employment, Education, and Housing in Jordan, the impacts of the Syrian refugee influx. Not only have we provided full coverage of the conference in terms of availing all the material that has been presented, but it's been designed from the outset to actually address 4 policy questions, for which 4 policy briefs were well prepared ahead of time, and followed by, in parallel, with 4 policy blogs, not to mention a sort of an introductory one and a concluding one. All the material, the proceedings, the discussions were also included in the full material, and you can access that online. I'll keep the example of details of numbers to what we've done for this conference, since we've all been together in it, to just give you a feel of what we're doing. But to me, the policy conference that was held last year gives an example of the broader aspect of what we can do by way of platforms. And it also gives an example of a bigger type event where we convene about 100 researchers and policymakers together to actually address policy questions. On the other extreme, we've also held a much smaller roundtable discussion for China, Egypt, and again, the details are there in the annual report should you wish to consult. What we're really aiming to do here is to build on ERF's independence, on ERF becoming the go-to place when we actually want to discuss, debate any of the policy questions. So platforms being the first, publications, policy briefs and perspectives, and the portal. If I were to give you an example of just the portal very briefly, this is one of the topics that one of the policy blogs that were actually included for the policy conference in Jordan, measuring economic destruction in Syria from outer space. Another is Syrian refugees in Jordan, educational enrollment and progress. A third is Syrian refugees in Jordan, healthcare and food security. To give you just a flavor of what was covered during that conference. What we've been trying to do as well as part of the outreach strategy is to interlink a lot of the ERF channels, publications, and activities together. So what we've been doing by way of promoting the work for the working papers is that we actually, having gone through the review process, and I'm ever so grateful for Dr. Hassan Hakimian for being ever so supportive and helping me throughout the entire process. It goes through a review process and it gets then published online. A newsletter goes out to 3,500 people. So if please you do not receive this newsletter, I urge you to register online for it or send me an email and I'll include you. It then gets tweeted. We use the social media to promote that. And we also then follow through with the authors with a request should they be interested in submitting an article for the forum, which then Romesh takes on, edits it, and includes it. Now, the policy portal comes at the end of the process to a large extent, but also opens it up to a lot of our community members. It's the latest ERF offspring. It's 18 months old, and we've published more than 160 articles by more than 180 contributors. Now, that's meant to be really building on not just the research generated by the community, but also by the expertise that is within the community. We've heard over the last couple of days how much we're at the time and age that we actually can build on the literature out there compared to others. We can look into the ideas generated. We can look into how we can convey this message more effectively on a timely basis. What ERF is trying to put in place are the mechanisms and the platforms to facilitate the process, but it's actually up to you to help us go through that. And I want to mention an exemplary contributor because to a large extent, the conference is an engineered effort, if you wish, where we actually try and pull together our different resources to reach out. But we also open up our platforms for contributions, and the exemplary contributor, not only has he been regular in terms of submitting blog posts, but the beauty of it is actually that we're planning ahead. He very much gets in touch with Ramesh and I early on and tells me, these are the policy issues and questions we're going to be working on, and these are the ones, that's how we can schedule them together. So in a way, we have a calendar together as to what's coming to keep on the radar so that we can actually publish it in time. Khalid Abu Ismail has been doing that with us closely for the past few months, and we're grateful for the contribution, and I really urge us to think of that. I can think of a few other names that have been doing that with us, that have been contributing to various extent. Now that I have to meet the challenge that my boss has set me, I want to share with you just a few figures on what we've done for the conference here by way of coverage. As you all know, there's been, Dr. Ibrahim mentioned that at the beginning, we've had 292 submissions this year for the conference. That's more than 30% above what the rate we had last year. It's gone through a very rigorous refereeing process, blind refereeing, plagiarism checks. It was reduced and selected carefully so that we can have today what we presented in the conference. The 62 papers have been discussed and are actually accessible online. The reason I'm saying this is that this is probably the last year we're going to be sort of availing any of the print material, because as of next year, we're going green. So we'll hope that we'll be always sort of electronically connected so we can get into the age and time that Hinton was telling us about for the use of technology for making our research more accessible. Just more data on how far we've gone. I can tell you that we've gone beyond those 4 walls and beyond the 220 participants we've had for the conference. We've had 40 interviews done over the past few days, which are going to be all featured online. We've had a couple of video trailers, the last one of which we've played at the beginning of this session, and we'll play it again at the end. We've sent 3 newsletters. The newsletters goes to 3,500, and we can report an opening rate of about 30%. So we know that we've been followed by 1,000 people on average beyond those 4 walls. Again, there's a culture that's changing in terms of tweets. We used to talk to ourselves forever long. So over the past few days, there have been 344 tweets from 85 people. That's more than double what was done last year. And the number of users actually using the tweets have been more than quadrupled. So I think we're moving more towards a culture of online. What we plan to do for next year is that we're going to be revamping our platform. The forum provides us with real-time data, so we do know the number of views for each and every blog post. It's out there on the data. And what we're trying to do with the new platform is really to ensure more participation, because that's what's going to make it work. The portal, again, would provide us with more interaction throughout the year, so I urge you to take part in it, and we'll keep you posted on the readership and how far it's actually gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Shireen. I would like to request that I move straight to the last item, given the time. I know that there are so many issues raised in these books, but these are books already published. I think we will hopefully have an opportunity to read them and to think about the open questions that could be followed up in further research and books. We actually have organized ourselves in terms of parallel sessions to cover 15 themes, and these 15 themes were made possible by the contributions and the commitment of 38 reviewers from our research community, and covering 15 themes. I will read them very quickly to you. And going with the blind review process tradition, I will only mention the team leader for the team reviewer leader, the reviewing leader for each theme, because that's what we usually do in order just to protect the blindness of the process. But of course, all the 38 reviewers are highly appreciated, and they know that we appreciate their support, and we look forward to further support. So we have Professor Shireen Al-Shawarbi, who led the team on public policy and social service delivery. Just to acknowledge and thank you on behalf of your team. And then we have Professor Atif Qobrusi, who led the team on macroeconomic theme. And we have Professor Paul Magdisi on the team on consumption, theme on consumption, poverty, and inequality. And Professor Khalid Saqqat, who unfortunately could not be with us here, who led the team on firm level performance issues. And we have Professor Mine Shinar, who led the team on oil prices shocks. And we have Dr. Maha Rabbat, who led the team on health, nutrition, and social welfare. We have Dr. Wafiq Jires, who led the team on Islamic banking and finance issues. And we have Professor Hassan Hakimian, who led a relatively big reviewing team on economic development issues. And we have Professor Jacqueline Wahba, who led the team on women employment and gender issues. We have Dr. Kamyar Muhaddis, who led the team on macro, saving and investment, exchange rates, business cycle, and macroeconomic policy. We have Professor Hadi Isfahani, who coordinated and led the team on gross productivity and structural change. And we have Professor Ali Abdel Qadir, who could not be with us here, who coordinated the team on education, general education. And we have Dr. Raid Safadi, who led the team on environment and renewable energy, trade policy, so trade and related and issues generally. We have Professor Raimundo Soto, who led the team on GCC growth diversification strategies, GCC exchange rate economics, and monetary policy. And last but not least, we have Professor Nicholas Sambanis, who again could not be with us here, who led the papers that were presented on extremism, civil wars, and terrorism. Now I would like to say a few things about honoring and providing and recognizing the excellence in terms of the best papers. Since we have 15 themes, rather than calling upon the leaders of the reviewing team to come here, which is going to take a very long time and to describe, and since we are going green, we are going to ask the team leaders to send us their comments and observations, which are very useful to reflect upon for the future. And then we will post them on the website in terms of like under a segment, assessment of competitive research in the 25th ERF conference, and with their nice pictures as well, so that they will be fully highlighted. But I will take the responsibility of announcing those selected, and I will call upon the team reviewing leader to hand over the prize or the certificate with me. So we have yes. Yes, Ali. Yes, we have the first one, Ali Ibrahim Injad. So the nominating team. I think we have to link the. Yes, Shireen. Is it Shireen? No? This is public policy and no. This is finance. The finance team. Yes, Mine. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You've got guts to write about corruption.
And then we have we have Jala Yusuf. So from we use here. Yeah, Jala Yusuf is here on the. Okay. And here Jala Yusuf is under gross productivity. So the theme of growth and productivity and structural change. Yes. So we have Jala Yusuf and Shahir Zaki. This is a joint. Okay, because actually this group, or particularly Hadi last time, they were a little bit tough or stringent maybe. They decided this time to give 2 awards. So we have another very worthy awardee, Shem Ozguzet. Ozguzet, yes. Sorry about this.
Jem Oskuzel. I guess he's not around, so
So
well, we'll pass it on to
any one of his friends perhaps available here who could take it on his behalf. Okay.
Congratulations to Jem. You need to pose for him also in the picture. Thank you. Well, you have 2 good papers. Not just because we had
Absolutely. That's why I said well deserved. Oh, okay. Okay. So we have under microeconomics, led by Atif Pobrusi, we have Mirehi Faisal. No. So apparently he's not here. So anyone from his university or an institution who could receive the, could receive the, Mirehi Faisal. هو ما سمع يعني. And Saeed, both of them. Yes. Okay, the macro group awarded to Zakaria Al-Faiz and Saeed Tunsi. So the macro guy was, they have Kamyar, I guess?
Yeah,
Is left, okay. Okay. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So finally, labor. Ahmed Uzuturk and Samih Toumin. عشان الزمن ضيق شوية. So I would like now to say a few words now that we are coming to close. I would like to, on behalf of Sayyid Abdul Latif Al-Hamad, who told me that he would not be able to be with us here for this last session, but he would like to extend his warm wishes for you for a safe return back home, and to thank you for your vigorous and active participation in this conference and in this special anniversary conference. And I would like actually on our behalf, all of us, to extend our deep appreciation and thanks to Mr. Abdul Latif, and also to the staff of the Arab Fund, who have been actually superb. They have been really wonderful on terms of everything, the organization and the support. And it has been a real pleasure for us to be the guest of the Arab Fund on this special occasion. As you all know that network operations, most notably the annual conference, is a very labor-intensive operation that requires considerable coordination and experience and dedication. And I would like to take this opportunity really to extend our deep appreciation and thanks on behalf of all of us to the women and men of the ERF. And I would like to take the opportunity to mention them in name on alphabetic order, starting with Huda Azmi. And Huda Azmi, I like to call her the mother of the pride, because she's really the one who represents the kind of the soul of this event, given her coordinating role, her interaction with all of you right from the beginning of this process, in terms of the submission of proposals, until to the very finest detail of the travel arrangement and the hotel and everything. And then when we come here, also in terms of the facilities and the meeting rooms and everything. So many thanks, Huda. Wish you continued health and vitality. We need you for many years to come, as we appreciate your long and distinguished service for this ERF and the community. And the colleagues of Huda include, on alphabetical order, Iman Abu Dahab, Marwa Afifi, Muhammad Ala Ad-Din, Salma Iwada, Iman Al-Hadari, Yasmin Fahim, among so many other things, she is also the secretary of the ERF Board of Trustees, and she has been supporting the ERF Board over the years. And in addition to that, obviously, she has organized most of the substantive content of the annual report on her capacity as Director of Programs and Research. Yasmin Fahim, then Shireen Ghunem, Dr. Shireen is the intangible counterpart of Huda, in charge of all this, IT-based activities and the design features that shows up in the bag, that shows up in the design of the annual report, that shows up in the design of the PowerPoints, and the variety of support that we see it in terms of the interviews and the social media. So Yasmin, Shireen, you have really done a great job, and really experience and knowledge is reflected very clearly in this particular event, and we look forward to future, activities and conferences. Anais Hakubian. Anais is a manager of the administration department, and as we all know, without management, nothing happens. So she's the one who organizes the contracts, the payments, the arrangement for making these activities happen. Faiza Jafar is the director. Is the director of the Dubai office, who has been instrumental in the initiation of the office, and we all realize the importance of having a presence in the GCC, and it's very important for us to have a complementary supportive office to the main office in Cairo. Maurice Luis. Maurice is the ambassador of the ERF in Europe, promoting the Mediterranean partnership in the context of the FAMIS network, so that we have a voice in Europe and we have partnership with European institutions as well as Southern Mediterranean institution. And the ERF co-manages the FAMIS in collaboration with the French Center in Marseille. So thank you very much, Maurice, for your efforts in this regard. Rana Hamad from Rana is right hand for Dr. Shireen, and she has also been quite active and productive in terms of the intangibles that support the preparation for this conference. Ramaj Nada. Ramaj Nada is also a major contributor together with her colleagues in the department that Yasmin heads on the substantive side of the agenda of the conference and the preparation for the conference. We have Sharif Usama. Sharif Usama and Muhammad Ala, together with their boss, Muhammad Yusri, the Director of Finance and Administration. Obviously, without them, nothing happens, because they are the one who actually control the purse, who make sure that we are coherent with the regulation and with the auditing, and that our board is kept satisfied and happy with how we are using the money of the network. And of course, among other things, this unit or this department is very important for the overall operation, obviously, of the ERF. We have Dalia Rafiq, who works in the team that's led by Maurice, based in Cairo, for the FAMIS, but she also provides support to the overall operation of the ERF. We have Ali Rashid, is the manager. Dr. Ali Rashid is a manager of the data unit within the Department of Programs and Research. And you will note that in this agenda, we have a very important session on data that created a link with us, for us with the statistics, National Statistics Center from 15 countries. And I would like to take this opportunity really to thank the representative of the Statistics Center from these 15 countries. And we had very important deliberations with them in the session itself, the open session, as well as in a follow-up closed session. And they have been very generous with their support and with their data. And we look forward to build partnership with more countries, more statistics centers, as well as, of course, to organize meetings in the future, bilaterally and as well as collectively. I would like also to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ali and also to mention the contribution of Iman Al-Hadari, to the development of the data work and also building the networks with the statistics centers. And they have really done a great job. Bolis Yusuf is the man Bolis Yusuf is our IT specialist who has been overseeing the process of the networking and the visual, instruments and everything, and the programming. And we would like really to extend our thanks and appreciation to his support. I should also, I think I recognize Muhammad Salim, but I would like to say that Muhammad Salim is the youngest member of the team. He's the youngest member of our team, and I understand that he and Bolis are the best players, soccer players in our team. We have an ERF team that I failed to join, but I will make a pledge to join. We have a soccer exercise every Wednesday, I understand, in Al-Maadi. So I would like to also recognize that aspect of the social network that we have in the ERF staff. Last but not least, we have Dr. Rasha Ramadan, and Dr. Shahir Zaki. Would like to introduce them to the community as distinguished young researchers from Cairo University who have actually accepted the assignment and the responsibility to support the ERF office or the ERF staff or management on a substantive input or on a substantive basis as part-time consultant, if I could use the word, but we consider them actually as informal staff with us. They actually contribute immensely to the formulation of ideas and the write-up of proposals, and we really appreciate their commitment and support. And I personally also appreciate the opportunity of joint work with Shahir, and I'm looking forward to also maybe write a paper or two with Rasha, so that I can claim that I am also a microeconomist. So really I would like to close here and thank everybody, and at the end to thank you all for your support to the ERF and wish you a safe trip back home. And we look forward to communicate, and understand from Shireen that we will be posting all the, all these PowerPoints and presentations, as well as some other things which she will probably tell you about.
I just want to also thank our social media team, Pierre and Ala, who made it possible to actually record all this video material together with Raouf and George. And also grateful for having Romesh. And Romesh, I know we've been working closely together forever, but I really wouldn't dare try and pronounce your surname. I know I'm going to get it wrong, but he's the famous Romesh who's helping out on the leading of as a co-managing editor for the forum, and he's the one who's most efficient in getting the responses and up the blogs on very timely basis and running the operation behind the policy portal. I'm really grateful we have them with us.
Actually, let me also echo Shireen to thank Romesh, the well-known editor of the forum, for his effort and for availing the time to stay with us. I would also like to thank again the media, Pierre and Ala, and the video team, Raouf and George, and also like to thank the journalists, Ustaz Misbah and Ustaz Muhammad Najm. So I'd like to thank them really for also promoting the ERF and disseminating the message of the ERF in Egypt and the Arab world. And finally, last but not least, we have the young Huda, Dina Jarhi, who is Dina Jarhi is a daughter of Huda, who has been a fast learner, and she now actually acquired all the skills and the trade. And so hopefully Dina will be following the footsteps of her mother and will continue contributing to conferences and events, because she's actually working with the network, the health network that is led by Dr. Muharrabat. Okay, thank you very much.